All right, back here again. Hang on, can I zoom that out anymore? Oh, I can. Okay, nice. So a little while ago, I put out a Q&A thing on Instagram asking for some questions, and I've been trying to work through those, so I'm going to work through a few more now. Now, remember, I'm not an expert at many things, but if people ask me questions, then I'm going to try and answer them. So first of all, we have timovanwyk, or something along those lines. They have a couple of questions. The first one is, how do you get more exposure for your work? And the second one is, how to not burn out and keep going when not motivated. Okay, well, I'm sure my answers are going to be very similar to the answers of other creators. How do you get more exposure for your work? It depends what you want the exposure for. The simplest answer is just put yourself out there as much as you can, although there are caveats to that. So there are some platforms which are better than others for getting people to see your work. On some platforms, your work lives longer than others. So for example, on ArtStation, your work lives longer, but it's not the best for getting people to see your work early on. On Twitter, your work tends to live shorter, but it depends on how much traction it picks up. The hashtags are very useful for getting new people to see your work, and generally that happens at a faster pace, and you can get requests through Twitter, as I quite often do, but then again, it depends on your audience size. I think Twitter is one of the best for growing an audience, therefore it's the best for exposure. Instagram, more recently than ever, I think, has proven itself to be one of the worst places for raising an audience, and I'm not just saying that from my spiteful perspective of not having as many followers on there as other platforms. I mean, everyone I've spoken to recently has said that they've been struggling immensely. Even people with large followings have been really hemorrhaging followers and not really gaining any new ones. I think it depends. Maybe there's something of an algorithmic change, or photos not being recommended to as many new people. Some people may be doing well, but from what I've heard, it's not as great, especially when compared to places like TikTok, where I believe, even though I haven't started on it, if the conspiracies are true, you're more likely to get a boost of attention when you start your account, because they want to give people a sense of being popular, so they want to stick to the platform. So yeah, if you want to utilize something like that, maybe prepare content before going for it. I know there's a bit of a behavior among new young artists who want to get exposure, where they tag their favorite creators in absolutely everything, but they'll tag all of their favorite creators in everything. And I'm going to tell you now, that doesn't really work. I think one thing that goes through their mind is, oh wow, if they like it, then they're going to share it with all of their followers and I'm going to be famous. That's not really how it works. The best way to get another creator to share your work is, first of all, not to ask them to share it for you, or to just tag them randomly in everything, even though sometimes I ask people to tag me in their work. No, the best way to do it is to just approach them, genuinely ask for advice about stuff. Just say, hey, I made this thing. If you're willing, if you have the time, I'd like some feedback. Just put yourself on their radar in a more genuine way. That tends to help. And when you take that mentality in mind, try and apply that to everywhere else as well. Because I've said to people, one thing which I've seen tends to work nicely on other platforms, especially Twitter as well, is when you've got a bit of a story behind what you're sharing, so people can see a human element in things. It makes them more inclined to share stuff or to interact with the content. So for example, if you make a really beautiful piece of artwork and you just provide the name, sometimes that does well, but if you provide the same piece of artwork with a bit of a story behind it in the status, then that does a lot better from what I've seen. So one really good way to get exposure is just to humanize yourself when you're sharing your content. It just helps across the board. I think when potential hirers come and they follow you and they see your content, they see that you're communicative in general, even if you're not talking to someone directly, then I think it makes them more inclined to contact you. So just keep those things in mind. The second question was how to not burn out and keep going when not motivated. I'll let you know when I figure that out. So the way to keep going on when not motivated. So motivation is a weird term because motivation could be both positive and negative. And I would like to maintain the kind of positive stance that, you should always be positively motivated to do something. The realistic side of it is that if you want to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you want to kind of prove that you have a selling point in life and in society and, rise above the average rabble to show that you have something of value, people that do that well tend to be motivated by both passion and fear. And the fear is the knowledge of the alternative. So for example, someone that's just been at the bottom of the prospect list and completely unable to get jobs and just really anxious and really struggling, if they get hold of an opportunity to get attention, they tend to really run with it and be hyper motivated compared to someone that hasn't really reached the bottom and gets the same opportunity. Does that make sense? So motivation comes in a few different flavors, and it's not all just a positive motivation, but you can kind of use that as a tool. So for example, I've been in some uncomfortable situations in the past when I didn't really have many prospects going, even though I understand my privilege and the kind of family that I'm in, but it was a unique set of challenges and it really was not a fun time. Sometimes when I need to get through a task which is a bit more grueling and just boring, but it's still essential to getting the work done, I tend to do the the things which sound a bit silly, which is I'll look at pretty pictures of things, not necessarily that I want, but that me in another universe would enjoy. So yeah, I'll do the things where I'll look at like expensive houses and apartments and stuff like that. Or sometimes another thing I'll do is I'll go onto Google Maps and just like randomly place myself in an area that I like and have a look around. And I'm not sure why, but something about that kind of helps to reorient myself and be like, hey, you've spent all day inside of a room staring at a screen. It's easy to lose perspective here, but let's just take you out of that mindset for a minute. Let's have a look at the world around you, the world which you could possibly explore, the things which you could possibly have, and all of that. And sure, there are a lot of arguments about having this kind of future-centric mentality not being a super healthy thing, but I feel like in the moment of just trying to get through basic tasks, that's an okay technique. Generally though, a way to stay motivated is to keep yourself moving. I don't work on anything in particular for too long, but then again, my attention span is different from other people's. I like to surround myself with inspiration, and I have a big bin essentially where I throw everything which I could possibly want to try, and it just keeps getting filled up, and the rate that it fills up is a hell of a lot faster than the rate that it empties. So if I'm feeling motivated and I don't know what to do, then there's always going to be something to do. That's never going to be a problem. The more likely problem, I think, would be running out of people that would actually care what I make, rather than me not knowing what to make, if that makes sense. But there is also the element where you should know your limit, because there comes a point where frustration is too dangerous of a thing to let flourish. Basically, if you know you're getting too frustrated with the work, then you need to change something. And I had that like a minute ago, actually. Earlier on today, I was preparing the new video about like a community material pack update. I knew in my mind that kind of there's only so much time I want to invest in working on this, because the investment is just, it's not always worth it for like the main YouTube channel. This is like one of these kind of harsh reality things you will learn about making content for people. Time investment does not correlate to success. That's like just something you'll need to learn. But I kind of tell myself things throughout the day like, okay, we'll prepare this today and then we'll record tomorrow, but there's always this impatient thing in my mind that's going, ugh, I don't have to wait till tomorrow. So I was like, right, we haven't done preparing it, but let's just record it anyway, and we'll salvage it in the edit. So sometimes there are like these little quirk moments which are like, just break that attitude that you have, break your plan, smash through it, and just reorient immediately. And that's one way that I break through frustration, doing like a harsh right turn when I feel it coming on. Another thing that I do is just like take a break from the work entirely, of course, and just play games for a while. And that can happen at any time throughout the day, but it tends to happen usually in the evening. When I've gotten a bit tired, I'm like, right, you know, we don't need to work anymore. We can pick this up the next day. For now, let's just completely zone out. I'll usually put something on my side monitor on YouTube, usually Game Grumps. I like watching and listening to them while I play games, and that's generally how I unwind. Okay, so that answers timovanwyk's questions. So let's try and get through some more. Okay, so hilaism, who I know as Hilly, I believe, asks, where can I buy the unicorn outfit? Easy, Amazon. But it depends what country you're in, I guess. It took a while to get here though, because it was like imported from a different country. I think China. Just have a look around. Mr. Fizzy says, is designing an essential skill to learn to become a 3D artist? It depends what you mean by designing, because designing is a general, like a very vague term. There are some common elements of design which kind of translate across different creative industries and skill sets, things like composition. And composition is much more than just a visual thing. I mean, composition is just generally a balance of elements. So strictly speaking, you could have an understanding of composition in a 3D and a 2D sense, but also in a musical sense, where you don't have too many layers of sounds kind of conflicting with each other. It's just about having a nice kind of satisfying balance of things. So I think there are some elements of theory for design in general, which you will need to be a 3D artist, but it's stuff that you'll probably learn from becoming a 3D artist. If you're thinking more along the stuff of like product design, then I guess that depends what kind of branch of 3D art you're going into. If you're doing product visualization specific stuff, then yeah, I guess you'd need an element of product design understanding. But yeah, I just think the description of a skill being designing is just too vague a term. So yeah, it depends. The more theory elements, yes, I guess so. Okay, so Bald Polnareff Art. I've never known how to pronounce your name. We've had all sorts of conversations and stuff, but I've never actually asked how I say that properly. Then again, I mispronounce almost every name. Why does everyone have weird names on the internet? Do you know, like the number of times I've had to apologize on the main channel for mispronouncing people's names? But it's not even just names, it's like usernames, which are blends of different words put together, and I have to try and find the right way to say it. Anyway, I'll stop complaining. They say, I can't fully commit to art right now, but I'm posting whatever I do regardless. Good idea. It depends, which is the answer to absolutely everything. Do you want to raise attention for the stuff you're posting? Are you posting it because you get enjoyment from posting it? Do you like receiving the validation for that? Consider all those things in deciding whether that's actually a good idea for you. I mean, a lot of the stuff that us creators post are just work in progresses anyway. So from an experimental standpoint, then yeah, I mean, it's okay posting the stuff you're working on, even if you can't fully commit to doing art. But yeah, that's just another one of those things which is kind of more of a personal choice. Funny thing is, I get asked quite a few questions which just boil down to it's a personal decision for your own specific lifestyle. But I think those are probably the questions that people struggle with the most. I have a policy of when people ask me for like specific life direction advice, should I go to college? Should I go to uni? What should I pick between those things? I say to them, look, I cannot make that decision for you. You have to choose that for yourself. Because if you unload a massive life decision like that onto a random YouTuber you watch, that's not a very responsible thing to do. And even if you trust me, I don't want to be responsible for sending you down a bad life path if things go wrong. So I have to be very careful when answering like very personal questions like that. So Creative Cumuluf, that's another one of those names, says, I have a hard time calling myself a 3D artist and don't know how else to describe it to outsiders. Any tips? I guess it depends what you mean by outsiders. So maybe instead of 3D artist, because someone like, I guess someone in the older generation who doesn't know anything about the digital industry might not understand what 3D artist actually means. More confusing on the 3D point. So maybe just call yourself a digital artist. That might be a bit easier to explain. If you're talking to someone that doesn't know anything about the computer world, then maybe just call yourself a software developer, just to kind of move the conversation along. If you don't want to be super specific, you can call yourself a content developer, content creator, because those are kind of general terms. Mixed media artist, that's another one as well. Designer, going back to the other question. But if you want to actually describe what you do, you can just say, I make artwork using software out of three-dimensional shapes. But I know these are quite difficult things to explain to people that just don't have any understanding of the computer space or the CG world in general. But I mean, those kinds of people are numbered now because the world is definitely moving in this kind of direction. Okay, noryd98. I recognize you. Hang on, what's the name? Peter, ole! All right, so how do you find, use, and sort your references? It depends. Sometimes I put them in a puref file and then have that file sitting in a folder related to the project. What I've also been doing now is, now that I've got a Notion database set up, I have like a gallery view in some pages, and I will put like important references in that gallery view so I can also open them up and make notes on the individual references. So it really depends on the kind of project, whether I think it's isolated to just one folder space, or whether I think it's large enough to go on like the Notion database page where I'll probably want to access it from anywhere. It's easier visually to throw things into a puref file and just have it all scattered brained around there. Those are the two main things I use, puref and Notion. I know there are lots of other softwares and websites to help with this, but I don't know too much about them because I don't do a whole lot of like reference collecting usually. Oh, Pinterest, actually. I do have a Pinterest account and a lot of kind of pin group board things on there, and a certain number of people follow me on that as well. But yeah, I don't use much more other than that for references. Headflyy says, how to make EEVEE look like Unreal Engine. Good luck with that. Okay, so that's a kind of difficult thing. They're both rasterization engines, but they are massively different in terms of render pipelines. I think would be the term for it, shader render pipelines. Now, I do always say to people that rasterization engines with a lot of effort can all be made to look pretty identical to each other, but in this case, good luck. I think the most significant thing would be sorting out the global illumination problem in EEVEE, and you have the SSGI add-on available for that, I believe. Although I think that should also be coming to EEVEE base anyway in the future, I'm not sure, someone let me know. And I'm basically trying to say it's kind of difficult. You're probably not going to get EEVEE to look like Unreal Engine in any simplified way. They have just very different tool sets in very different contexts, so yes. Trippeante.exe, any tips for an efficient workflow? It really depends what you're making. These are such vague questions I'm getting through. But yeah, okay, so some general tips I'll try and give. Don't overthink things. So much time is wasted in all kinds of projects just from people waiting to do something, overthinking things which don't really need to be thought about, or like assigning time and attention to the wrong things. Remember that on most projects, like most of the time is allocated to the least amount of effort. This is the whole perfectionism thing. So you'll spend so much time at the end of a project usually just mixing up with details rather than like, you know, the main important changes which are made. So if you can learn to identify where you're doing things which you don't need to be doing, regardless of what type of project it is, those are usually the places where you'll find opportunity to make your workflow more efficient. So for example, for me with making videos, too many folders, too many directories. When I'm making notes for videos, I don't need to write out full sentences. I can just write like, you know, very simplified bullet point ideas. That's more efficient. If I don't need to wait to do a task and I can just do it now, then let's do that. Recording with the screen at the same time as talking, that's more efficient than doing what I did earlier, which is talking in front of this, but you've got to make a choice, what do you think is actually more viable? So yeah, it's all up to you, the type of content you make and what you can identify as a problem. Okay, Rack Garcia says, in a 24-hour period, how many hours of working in Blender could be considered as a productive day? However many you feel are productive. It depends. All of these questions are it depends answers. So with a lot of learners, one thing I've said in other videos as well, is you've got to get the experimentation and the mileage to get in your learning. So that's experimenting with new techniques and putting them to the test. So actually applying them, that's the mileage. If you're stuck doing the same thing over and over and over again for like 14 hours, using exactly the same techniques, doing exactly the same thing, 14 hours of unproductive work, would you really consider that productive? But if you did like 30 minutes of like intense learning and trying new things and making new things, would you consider that more productive? So like 30 minutes more productive than 14 hours of unproductive work. So you see, like, it's kind of, I don't think you can measure productivity simply on a time measurement. So that's the answer I would have for that question. They've asked a few more as well. So in a node group, how could I control a color ramp with 3 positions using drivers? I cannot answer that standing up here. I would need to experiment with that. I need to do more work relating to drivers. What I can say though is controlling color ramps using node groups is annoying as frick. I wish there was just like a general color ramp input for node groups. That would be very, very helpful. Another question they've asked is, are there any good and comprehensive Blender rigging tutorials that you know of? Oh yeah, actually, who did it? CG Dive? Todor on Twitter. I think they've done a rigging course. Pierre did the animation course. Did Royal Skies do rigging things? I'm trying to like roll through the list of people I've spoken to in my head. I think CG Dive did the rigging course. Let me look this up. CG Dive. Rig anything with Rigify, series intro. Yeah, check them out because they've done a lot of rigging related content. So, I mean, there's probably other people as well, but they're the one that I know of. So take a look. All right, so Thomas or Thomas HH. I would like to know, like, your day-to-day life. Do you have some morning routine, hobbies, etc.? Yes, I do. My hobby is slaving away at YouTube and Blender. No, okay. I tend to get up somewhere between 8 to 9:45-ish. That's like usually when it happens. I like to have a decaf coffee. I noticed that for some reason the decaf coffee specifically improved my mood throughout the day. I don't know why. I think it's something to do with the ingredients. It's definitely not related to any slight trace of caffeine content, because sometimes I have caffeine drinks as well and it doesn't have the same effect. So yeah, the decaf coffee is like a kind of mood stimulant for me for some reason, so I have that in the mornings. Generally the first few hours of the day are my most productive, so that's when I'll get most of the work done. Though I do get distracted and watch YouTube quite a lot and go on Reddit. I used to play video games quite a lot throughout the day. I've kind of restricted it a bit more to the evenings now, which is a bit more sensible, I think. But part of that's also from an attitude of being a bit more serious about the work and dealing with the anxieties that comes with work as well. I'll go for walks with the dog. I'll spend time chatting to people online. I like films. I watch quite a few films. Part of that also comes from my dad being a special effects supervisor, one of the best in the world, I might add. I'm a bit nerdy. Sometimes I do. Okay, so like some months I'll read a lot and then I'll go like months without reading hardly anything. But I really like science and nature and philosophy. I'll listen to like podcasts about all that sort of stuff, listen to random lectures. I just like kind of enjoying the content which kind of puts your mind outside of your headspace and kind of gives you like a wider perspective on things. Music wise, I like listening to a lot of music, usually kind of like synthetic-y things, although there's a lot of dark stuff in there, but it doesn't always have to be dark. I like a lot of kind of colorful and bright things, but I like the unusual type of music, which kind of, again, takes you out of a headspace and transports you to another world. A lot of film and game soundtracks are really nice. I like the Division soundtracks. Disaster Piece does some fantastic work. Like, I think the It Follows soundtrack, which is a horror one, is a really good demonstration of the kind of stuff I like, because it's just so like juxtaposed to what you're usually used to listening to in reality, but it still gets like the same emotions across that like traditional orchestral music might have given you from a horror scene, but it's just like all synthetic and I like it. Purity Ring, they have like kind of interesting takes on music that I like, and they do some interesting covers of old songs, but it's more like musical poetry. That's why I like it. Not like rap. I think people think like rap is like musical poetry in a bit of a harsher way, but I think stuff like what Purity Ring make is more like actual musical poetry. There are some musicians I like listening to throughout the day that kind of just have an interesting way of playing with emotions in their choruses that like no one else does. So Jonah Lee, or I Am I, Who Am I, is like their other alias. Is like a really cool Swedish artist I like listening to. They've got some really powerful work. Also Neurotech has something similar as well. Like just you find like these little creatives that aren't necessarily well known, that are kind of just like lost in their own creative worlds. And sometimes they produce some like really, really cool stuff. Just like maybe not even an entire song, but something hidden away in like one song that you hear and you're like, whoa, and like no one else like knows about it. Anyway, yeah, and then of course, you know, the Blender related hobbies, all that sort of stuff. But you know, I tend to try and keep my life a bit focused. I have a really privileged hobby, which I hesitate to say. So this one's less of a day-to-day routine and more of just like something in general. We used to do this thing, and we've done it less now, like as a family, but we had this thing where like every birthday we would pick out a random hotel we had never been to in like London or something, and then spend the night there, and then kind of like rank it mentally in comparison to all the other hotels, which is a kind of silly hobby, but I really like it because I love the design of like different buildings and kind of different experiences like that. So I have some favorites in my mind. One of my favorites is a Hotel Cafe Royale, which is by Piccadilly Circus. I like the design of like their rooms and corridors and stuff. They kind of incorporate like these tall wood walls with white breeze blocks, and it's like super contemporary and clean inside of the rooms. The Mondrian, so the sea containers hotel on the bank of the Thames, is also pretty cool. They've got some really nice kind of like river view rooms, but I'm not a super fan of the design of their rooms because like the artwork they have is very kind of a bit too physical and weird. The Shangri-La at the Shard was very, very cool, but again, I think a lot of the selling point for that is just the view. It's kind of halfway up the Shard building, which is the tallest building in London. So I mean, now that I'm talking about it, I'm noticing that another one of my hobbies is kind of related to architectural design. That's something I'm kind of figuring out over time. As I'm experimenting with more and more things, I'm noticing that I kind of have this interesting resonance with architectural type stuff and interior design, which I didn't really think about beforehand. So I'm wondering whether to lean into that a bit more. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble on a bit. Okay, so moving on. Stupid Giant. So someone I've recommended in recent videos who's been doing everyday artworks on Instagram. If you weren't doing YouTube, what would you do instead? Good question. I may have ended up working for a game company, but maybe not. I might have gone to work with my dad instead, because there's kind of a lot more there, a lot more possibilities, but it would have required giving up hobbies and friends and free time and stuff like that, because it's a very intensive line of work, and I wasn't prepared to go into doing that. So it was giving me like a fair amount of anxiety. But if I think about that in the present, that question now, if I wasn't doing YouTube, what would I do instead? Well, now I've got a kind of established platform in product development. I think I would probably lean much more heavily into that and kind of try and set up different kinds of networks around this product development space and try and network with people who are also more inclined in that way. So I think, well, your kind of perspective changes throughout life depending on what experience you pick up. So I think the alternative to YouTube back then, before I started YouTube, and the alternative to YouTube now are very different things. And I spoke recently in a Q&A video where I answered Wilson's question about why I stick with YouTube, saying that I have this thing where I try and establish as many backup plans as I possibly can with everything I make, which is part of the reason why I'm not too great at coming back to projects I've already started, because I always want to start making new projects instead. That's something I'm still trying to get over, because, you know, it's a good thing to go back and add value toward projects. So I think if the YouTube disappeared, I'd have to kind of really sit down, have like a bird's eye view of all the different things I've been doing, and try and make executive decisions about what the best direction is and where to go next. I may also like need to employ some help with that. I'm already starting to set up a delegation space to get other people on board to help with the current type of work. So yeah, I mean, it's quite an involved answer. If you could have any superpower for making art, what would you pick? Interesting. Superpower for making art. I would probably like to be able to animate things like that without actually doing it. You know, like have people walking around, animate faces, all of that kind of thing. I don't mind setting up the scene and the environment, or maybe even doing the character like design and modeling and all of that. If I could just like boop and animate it like that, then that would be fantastic. Another thing would be music. I would like to be able to do the music side of things without actually making the music. There are psychological challenges between moving between the different types of creative skill sets like that. So yeah, I guess as a superpower, just being able to do one thing, the thing that I do most of the time in Blender, would be nice, and then to have everything else just happen, that would be the superpower. Jawad or Jawad.e050. Did you work for a VFX studio before? So technically, No, I wasn't hired by a VFX studio, but the lines are a bit blurry. I did a bit of work, well actually no, it wasn't work. I was hired for a Warner Brothers production, but I was working for my dad, but specifically for a while under the Robomoco company. He's a co-director of it. And on there I was doing like software related things for converting VFX animations coming in from Framestore, I believe, and turning them into file formats which could be properly read by the KUKA robot arms. And there were multiple things involved with that. I mean, there was even some conversations like I'd have to go to a couple of meetings kind of out on set by the robots, or sometimes the VFX companies have like temporary offices in the studios, so we'd have to go and speak to them and say hi to them. So no, I never actually worked in a VFX studio before, but I worked with VFX studio when doing that kind of work. I don't know whether I would actually want to work for a VFX studio. I think there are some positions it could be fun with and some positions it could be not so fun with. I think there's maybe more stress involved with it than people might expect, but it really depends on the production and the people you're working with and the studio and yeah, all sorts of factors. I think one conclusion I've kind of come to is that I think I would rather work for smaller companies than larger companies. Smaller companies full of more generalist people where everyone knows each other a bit more personally. I think that might be the kind of slightly more creative environment I might enjoy a bit more. So yeah, I mean, I've alluded to my dad a bit in this video, but I haven't spoken too much about my slightly unique upbringing and unique perspective for the film industry. Basically, I've grown up on set, and I've spoken about it a little bit in some other places, but I won't go into it too much here, but maybe one day. K.A05 says, how can I make best model for CFD sims? Is that Cinema 4D sims? How can I make best model for... I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer that question because I don't really understand the question. Morpho 3.9 would love to see a video from you about render settings. Yeah, I should do another one. I think I did one about rendering tips in Cycles. I think it was just when Cycles X was announced. It was like one of the kind of architectural viz type ones inspired by Mirror's Edge. If you type in Curtis Holt tips for rendering, it should pop up, but it's a bit outdated now because obviously Cycles has been massively updated and there's a whole other conversation to be had about the new render settings. I also need to update my startup file, which is online, because I've changed my personal render settings quite a bit since I last updated that. So yeah, I probably should do one. A poutine making art. What is that? I think that's a kind of dish or something. I hope it's not slang for something rude. They say, I'm currently a full-time student and I want to create more. How can I get more efficient? Okay, we'll refer to our discussion about efficiency earlier on in the video. However, since you're a student, don't stress yourself out too much. But I will say, from one thing I've kind of noticed from a lot of students is they have a lot of schoolwork, but they don't have a lot of personal portfolio work. And that's always a bit depressing. It depends on the person, of course. Some of them do have a good balance. So even though I say don't stress yourself out too much, do stress yourself out a little bit, but just explore some of your personal ambition. Danieloakfield says, when you feel stuck with new content or topics, what do you do to break the impasse? Well, I don't typically feel stuck when it comes to making new stuff. Because like I said earlier, there's just like a bin of ideas and things to try, and there's too much to try and play with. The problem isn't necessarily finding something to make. It's deciding which of those everythings would actually be a good idea to make. And I'm not always great at picking those out, and it depends on many factors. Do I really want to make it? Is it good for the channel? Is it good for business? Even if it's not, is it something that I want to make so much that I won't care about that? So these are all the other factors going on. That's where the main impasse is, not necessarily feeling stuck with idea-wise. And the last question I have is from Ben. My Premiere Pro is crashing all the time. Tips? Well, in what way is it crashing? Because mine never used to crash, and it's kind of recently started doing this really freaking annoying thing, which no software has ever done before, and it never did it before. It's only since I updated to Windows 11 or I updated Premiere, one or the other. Sometimes, when I drag an image file into a bin, Premiere freezes, every monitor goes black, I hear a beep from the computer. When it comes back, every monitor except for the main one is off, and everything has gone slow, and even when I close Premiere, it still chugs. I think it's a GPU problem, but it's not a GPU problem because no other software does it. It's a Premiere problem. It does something to the GPU, it murders it, and I have to restart the computer. When I reopen the Premiere project again, it does it again. So I start trying to remove like the file I added to the bin in case it's like a cache memory problem or whatever. Then I need to close, restart the computer again, and sometimes I need to do that several times before I finally open the Premiere project again and it doesn't crash. I don't know what the frick they're doing. It never used to happen. It's one of the worst software bugs I've ever seen. It's funny I went so long without like having any large bugs like that, and then all of a sudden I've got this killer one. And I thought I got over it, right? Because I updated Premiere the other day and I edited video, dragged in some image clips, and it was fine. Then when I went to close Premiere, I went to press the X button at the top, then it did it. Like when I'm trying to close the program, then it murders the GPU and just freezes out everything. I don't understand what it is. I hate it. They better get on top of it. Maybe I should start pestering them with like reports and stuff, which I usually can't be bothered to do, but we'll see. But knowing Adobe, they would probably won't get around to it until like 40 years time. So anyway, yeah, well, it's still the best editing software I have available to me. And yes, I have tried DaVinci Resolve. Speaking of DaVinci Resolve, I cannot believe the amount of space they take up for caching files. It's absolutely ridiculous. All right, I'll stop complaining. Anyway, yeah, so hopefully I've kind of caught up on all those questions. Might be a bit of a long video, but yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Maybe someone found that interesting. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.